Advanced technologies have opened up the world of possibilities for U.S. energy production. Other innovative technologies have created new opportunities in efficiency and environmental management. Technological innovation is a key to a productive and prosperous economy. Our next speaker, Dr. Julio Friedmann, has extensive global experience in energy technology development and deployment. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Clean Coal and Carbon Management at the Office of Fossil Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, located in Washington. Previous to his appointment, he was Chief Energy Technologist for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Dr. Friedmann is one of the most widely known and authoritative experts in the U.S. on carbon capture and sequestration. He has testified before the U.S. House and Senate, as well as before several state legislatures. Dr. Friedmann is well-published with articles in Foreign Affairs, Financial Times, and the New York Times. He has worked closely with the U.S. State Department, even the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Energy Association, and the Southern States Energy Board. Dr. Friedmann has led technical work on large CCS projects in Europe, Africa, North America, and China. He also served as a co-director for the USChina Clean Energy Research Center on clean coal and CCS. Dr. Friedmann received his BS and MS degrees from MIT. He received his PhD from the University of Southern California. Dr. Friedmann, Julio, is a longtime friend of the Southern States Energy Board. If you haven't heard some of his stories most recently about his travels and his dealings in China, it's a fascinating experience. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Friedmann with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julio Friedmann.
Sure, this will be up any moment. Delighted to be here. Thank you all. And again, I'm Julio Friedmann, only Julio Friedmann you'll ever meet. Before I say something, I want to say something. When I was first invited to come here, Ken and I had talked about what it is I should discuss. I love talking about what we do at the Department of Energy. I love talking about advanced technology. And he was like, no, let's not talk about those things. Even though they're interesting, even though they're good. Actually, what I really want to talk about is opportunities for states in the South to think about partnerships internationally, in particular in China. And so I've really tried to put that together with that in mind. I'm also going to do my level best to come in under time here. I've got a half an hour budget. I'm going to shoot for 20, so there's lots of time for question and answer. For those of you who haven't heard me talk before, buckle up. I talk fast. But I think you're going to enjoy it, and hopefully you'll get something interesting out of it. I've become comfortable with the fact that I don't see the world the way most people see the world. One of the ways that I see the world that most people don't see the world is this. We live in a time of abundance. Most people think that we're in some time of dwindling opportunities and dwindling expectation, hogwash. We live in a time of abundance. In particular, that abundance is based on the fact that we have abundant access to fossil energy in many, many parts of the country, in coal, in oil, and gas. This supports economic growth, it creates jobs, and it creates wealth. As far as I'm concerned, that's a once in a generation opportunity to build. And part of what I hope to be able to accomplish here, and part of what I hope to be able to accomplish with the DOE, is to think sensibly about how to build for the near term and for the long term. These are pictures which y'all I'm sure have seen before. I want to draw your attention to the fact that coal use is up everywhere. I want to draw your attention to the fact that shale gas production is, per Mike's presentation just a moment ago, has led to dramatic changes. And of course, oil we just heard about too. We're actually now at world record productions. One of the things that gives me great pride when I go around the world is that quietly, many countries around the world are grateful for this abundance of U.S. oil production, because as OPEC's production has crashed, we've been able to fill the gap and stabilize global oil prices. And they grudgingly and quietly acknowledge that that's actually something they're very grateful for. At the same time, the threat of climate change is real. Haven't been a lot of talk about that here. Jonathan Levy mentioned this yesterday, but I'm a scientist and this is basically the way it is. One of the things that's also true is that if we actually really want to reduce emissions as a national goal, you really do need all of the above, and all of the above includes efficiency, it includes renewable, and hell yeah, it includes fossil energy. We absolutely need a clean fossil energy future. This analysis is from the International Energy Agency, but there's a dozen economic analyses that look basically the same. And the punchline is if you take any of the options off the table, the cost of doing this skyrockets. In fact, particularly if you take carbon capture and storage and fuel switching off the table, the cost of tackling climate change goes up 80 to 120%. It's a big cost. And the reason why is because in some market, this is the cheapest option. So you need all of the above. We need a robust, energetic, thriving fossil energy industry in this country. And we need to think about tackling the emissions associated with it in some sensible way. In this, I'm a passionate advocate for carbon capture and storage. I won't spend a lot of time talking on this today, but it's the key technology for this era of fossil energy abundance. Although a lot of people bash on our administration around this, we've put $6 billion into this since President Obama took office. We've also got another $8 billion in loan guarantee authorities. So I don't consider $14 billion to be chump change. I think that's actually a substantial commitment to trying to figure out how to keep this option on the table. And the Department of Energy really leads the world in this. And you've heard about some of the strong leadership from Secretary Moniz. And we've got new leadership across the board in the Department of Energy. All of us are oriented to focusing on solutions and focusing on deployment. We're not interested in airy-fairy projects or academic studies. We actually want to see deployment. Clean energy technology only has value when it's deployed, and so we're focused really on that. And we have really excellent partners to do this in industry and academia, and I wanted to highlight some of those associated with southern states. We've been working with southern states really since the Department of Energy began, even before that, when IRTA predated the Department of Energy. And we think that this is a fabulous partnership and want to strengthen it. I want to draw your attention just to a couple of things that we take some pride in. I'm particularly fond of big projects. Big projects focus investors, they focus regulators, they focus engineers. And if you can't do it in a big project, ultimately, then it's not going to be very useful. So this is one of our big projects. This is in Port Arthur, Texas. There's a big honking refinery out here, and what we did is we took the CO2 coming out of the steam methane reformer up at the top of the page, captured it, compressed it, put it in a pipeline, stored it. This was a project with Air Products. It's been operating for 18 months, and we've put basically 1.5 million tons of carbon dioxide that was going into the atmosphere underground and produced many millions of barrels of oil using that. This is what progress looks like. This is the Kemper project. I know that many of you here are familiar with this. This is transformational technology developed over 25 years in partnership with the Department of Energy, Southern Company, and KBR. This went from an idea in somebody's head to a 528 megawatt reactor. It's going to capture and store 2.7 million tons of carbon dioxide a year, with 75% of that CO2 going to Denbury and 25% going to Forest. This is going to turn on in just a few months. We hope to see many of you there with the brass bands and ribbon cuttings and all the cake you can eat. This is one that we're particularly enthusiastic about. This is the Parish Project. This broke ground just September 5th. You see Deputy Secretary Ponem in there with one of the shovels. This is a wonderful project. We're just delighted with this, chiefly because it explores a new business model. This project began as a 60 megawatt CCS retrofit, and when they crunched the numbers, NRG said, we can't make enough money with 60 megawatts, so we got to go bigger or go home. So they quadrupled the size of the project. They raised it up to a 240 megawatt retrofit for CCS and needed no additional federal funds to do that. And the reason why is because of this new business model. Basically, they own the plant, they own the retrofit project, and they own a piece of the pipeline, and they own a piece of the oil field. So if it costs them $70 to capture CO2 and they're selling it for 30, they lose money, and you can't make that up in volume. That's not what they're doing. They're selling themselves CO2 and getting the profits from the oil production. And with this, they love this project. Not only did they quadruple the size of this project, they said they're going to do a second and they're going to do a third as soon as the first one's operational. Again, that's what we consider to be demonstration of success. I do want to have a shout out again to the National Carbon Capture Center here in Alabama. Again, this was mentioned earlier, but this has actually been a terrific partnership. This was competed even openly 5 years ago. Southern Company won the competition, has been managing it since. It was recompeted this year. Southern Company won again in an open competition. We have a new 5-year commitment. We're going to put another $180 million into this, and matched by Southern, and we're going to be testing technologies that will actually dramatically reduce the cost and improve the performance of CCS. We're just incredibly, incredibly happy with this, and I encourage all of you to go there, take a look, and see that outstanding work that's going on there. Now I want to focus and pivot to international partnerships. Climate change is an international problem. Most of the companies in the United States aren't even really US companies anymore, they're multinational companies. We have 40,000 Siemens employees in Florida. We got something like 60,000 Bosch employees in the United States. Alstom, Shell, BP. We actually have, we are incredibly intimately tied across the world. And while I am a deep, passionate advocate for creating jobs in the US and remaining globally competitive, we actually need partnerships to succeed, period. We need partnerships in commerce, we need partnerships to accelerate deployment, and there's lots of different ways to do that. In particular, for partnerships, joint ventures, foreign direct investment, showcase projects, there's a lot of good things to be done here. Good news is I never have to convince our secretary that this is worth doing. He comes pre-sold, has spent an awful lot of his time trying to figure out not only how to build these sort of international partnerships, but actually how to help US companies that are in the center of them. In that context, we have done these things through the Asian Pacific Economic Consortium, the APEC. We've done this with the Clean Energy Ministerial, the Boao Forum, World Energy Congress. Just in a couple of weeks, my boss, Chris Smith, is going to be down in Cartagena trying to help companies there. So there's an awful lot that can be done on this. And some of that is also just sharing information, sharing data, international science platforms and projects. There's just a lot to be done. In this, there's a lot of work that my office does in the Office of Clean Coal with many countries. The countries we deal with the most are China, Canada, China, Norway, China, India, China, Saudi Arabia, China, the United Arab Emirates, and China. Reasons are pretty straightforward. China and the US are #1 and #2 economies, #1 and #2 energy consumers, #1 and #2 coal producers, #1 and #2 coal users, #1 and #2 greenhouse gas emissions. If we're not working with China, we're just not doing anything really useful. Between you and me, I actually don't care what the emissions profile of Croatia is. I care a lot about what the emissions profile of China is. They have an incredible coal economy. 67.5% of primary energy comes from coal, about 80% of their electricity. They use about 4 billion tons per year now. That's going to continue to grow for a while. 6 billion tons or more of carbon dioxide leaves their country every year from coal consumption, and they're on a continued growth trajectory for all of these things. It's also interesting to know that there's substantial government interest in working with the United States on this, not just as sort of bilateral, flag to flag kind of engagements, but really thinking about how do they get trade, how do they get companies working together, how do they actually coordinate unilateral actions for global good. And I can't sort of, let me reiterate that, because it's something that people don't necessarily clock. Whatever happens with these multinational climate negotiations, whatever happens with all of these long diplomatic negotiations, one of the best things that our countries can do is talk to each other and decisively act on our own interests together. Coordinated unilateral action is the name of the game. And in this, we have a lot to do in this space. The recent reforms that Xi Jinping has brought forward in the state-owned enterprises help. He's been doing this in a way that actually encourages clean energy use, including in the coal sector. They have been very, very adamant about the fact that CCS is part of their future and utilization is part of their future. They insisted that this was part of the climate change working group, and happily so. This is a new bilateral framework for the US and China to sort of get in on a bunch of stuff. But I wanted to draw your attention to the last statement on this slide, because not everybody has quite clocked this. I don't know if y'all watched the 2008 Olympics when it opened, but like in the Olympics, basically China's going for the gold in every medal. There's no event where they're interested in the silver. They're just full tilt boogie on all of it. And they're putting in money, they're investing in people, They're putting together joint ventures. They're repatriating Chinese people who have been educated in the West. They're called sea turtles because they go back to the land of their youth. Somebody told me this once, and I've never forgotten it. China has 4 times the number of people as the United States. That means they also have 4 times the number of smart people. They have an immense base from which to do this work. And that presents opportunity, mostly. We can't ignore the potential concerns or threats that come with that, but in fact, the opportunity space is large and real. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide and talk about a number of things in that context, because the opportunities for partnership are large and varied. One of the things that most people don't understand about working in China is what a state-owned enterprise is. Because is it actually part of what the state is, or is it actually part company, or is how does it actually work in a communist capitalist mix that is China? First of all, one of the things that a lot of people are surprised is that there's a lot of big private companies in China. They've figured out how to work inside the system, but there's groups you can go there. The state-owned enterprises themselves, though, see themselves in part as serving Chinese needs. The customers are Chinese, but they also see themselves very much as multinationals. And they want to be recognized as multinationals. Just as one example, Huaneng, the world's biggest power company, just for grins, just to calibrate y'all on this, Huaneng adds about 13,000 megawatts of power a year, just the one company. And so they are by far the world's biggest power company, and they have basically maxed out the Chinese market. For them to grow, they actually have to look for opportunities in other places. They are also extremely good technology developers. That's true for all the state-owned energy technologies. So they're looking for markets for their technology overseas. So there's an opportunity to do something with that. Something else that's important to note, these people have cash. They have incredible volumes of money. It's not at your disposal. It's not altogether at their disposal, but there's ways to activate it and there's ways to move it. And they are seeking opportunities for foreign direct investments that are smart and in particular differentiate themselves. I'll come back to that. Something I want to take a moment here on is how the Chinese government sort of thinks about all of these things. And if you haven't been to China before, you're not familiar with it, I'm going to just ask you a question to calibrate my speech here. Who all knows what the NDRC is, the National Development and Reform Commission? Raise your hands. Never heard of the NDRC, so we got one from NATL. There is no counterpart in the United States for what the NDRC is. Basically, you can't build anything in China without NDRC permits. NDRC sets the price for labor, the price for materials, what your return on investment is, and your timeline. They can change commodity prices at the drop of a hat. Second time I'd been to China 28 times. Second time I'd been to China, the day before I'd gotten there, NDRC called all the state-owned oil companies and said, guess what, the price of gasoline goes up 20% tomorrow. Have a good day. There's sort of no counterpart to that. So these agencies in China have this immense, crazy outsized role in how it goes. So part of the art for getting these things done is that everybody has relationships with each other. Academicians have relationships with the NDRC. NDRC has relationships with the state-owned companies. All these people have relationships with Chinese banks, which tie back to the Communist Party. And so there's this network of relationships that sort of make it all come together and is sort of at the core of how you get business done here. In that context, moving on, one of the places where these partnerships and relationships originate is in provinces. Provinces have their own resources and wealth. They have a certain degree of autonomy to them, much larger than most people realize. Again, it's not unlike states in the United States or provinces in Canada, and the provincial governors have immense clout and latitude. They look for efforts to partner with the United States states. There are a couple of notable working relationships already. The state of West Virginia has a great partnership with Shanxi Province, that's Shanxi with one A. Wyoming has a great partnership with Shanxi Province, that's Shanxi with two A's. But actually they've sort of high-level MOUs, and just this picture where you see here is actually a joint clean energy workshop that was jointly hosted by the Shanxi government in Taiyuan and the government of West Virginia. and put this on actually as an opportunity for companies to get together and to talk about how to work. We had 80 representatives from the US at this conference. Half of them were the presidents of companies. So this is a way to get things done. And something else that people don't understand about provinces in China, you also don't understand about cities in China. You probably have never heard of the city of Chongqing. Many of you may not have. The city of Chongqing is now estimated to be the biggest city in the world. It has 38 million people in it. That's 20% more people than Texas in one city. City of Beijing has actually 12 million people on their rolls, but it's probably 16 million people, so there's 4 million people sort of just running around Beijing unaccounted for. And third-tier cities in China, the small cities, the ones that barely rate, that are struggling to differentiate themselves, third-tier cities have between 1 and 5 million people in them. They're generally bigger than Denver and they're bigger than Houston. So the opportunities to provide services in cities, to work with people in cities and in provinces, is immense and underscoped in the way that people think about these things. In the same way that there are sister state-province relationships, it's possible to have sister city relationships. And this is a way, again, which you can sort of try to up your engagement with groups in China in a useful and productive way. Let me talk about the investors. Y'all have some feeling, I think, for just how much money is sort of floating around there. The epicenter for that, sort of like the Manhattan for China in this, is the Shanghai Pudong district. It's just where all the rich investors are. And there's ways to meet these people. And they have total latitude on how they spend their money. Not just for sort of debt financing, but for equity financing. And a lot of that comes from private groups. Again, these are people who are real estate barons and want to get into the shale business. Like, they're trying to figure out how to go about this. But also, banks make investments. One of our best projects, the Texas Clean Energy Project, a couple of people here have talked about, is likely to be underwritten by the China Exim Bank to the tune of about $2 billion of debt. In addition to that, companies make direct investments. We're working with a deal with Sinopec, the state-owned, one of the state-owned oil companies, but they're prepared to put about $300 million of equity into a project because they think they'll get a decent return on it. And what's interesting is these banks and companies are prepared to take a lower IRR than a lot of other groups, a lower internal return on investment, because NDRC says, hey, this is a long-term strategic play for us. So you don't have to make 17% IRR. Maybe you could get away with 5% or 9% IRR, and we'll still bless the project. Last thing I want to talk about is with universities. This is sort of a stealth opportunity that not a lot of people clock. I work at an agency that's got about 115,000 people in it. Okay? DOE is a pretty good agency. They're a pretty big agency. They're nowhere near as powerful as NDRC, which I'd mentioned before, right? You know how many people NDRC has working for it? 1,000. The way that they get their work done is they outsource the policy. They outsource the contracting. They outsource all this stuff. Where do they outsource the policy that drives China? They outsource it to universities. Something that I learned early on is there's about 180 people who run China, and they all went to college together. And basically, they were like all in a quad in a dorm. And when they grew up and went off, one of them became the president of a company, one of them became a president of a bank, one of them became a senior administration official, and one of them became a university professor. And they still all get together and toast each other's health. And then one of them calls the other three on the phone and says, have I got a deal for you? We're all going to get rich. And then something activates, and you put together the financing, the policy position, the company, and the deal. It's just amazing. But the universities, as a consequence, are places where China's future is actually written. You want to know who writes the 13th five-year plan in China? University professors. You want to know who writes the fiscal policy in China? University professors. So there's opportunities to engage with these people and to build partnerships with universities that are not just peer-to-peer research institutions, scientist to scientist sitting at a bench, but actually are high-level strategic engagements between state colleges and universities, between private colleges and universities, and with an aim towards doing something that's truly remarkable and differentiating. I'm going to roll ahead now quickly so that we have more time for Q&A here. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. One of them is that there are a couple of new platforms to do this engagement. One of these is the Climate Change Working Group. This is a group under what's called the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. It was started by Hank Paulson, former Treasury Secretary for George Bush. This is a new effort now, the Climate Change Working Group started by John Kerry and Xi Jinping. And basically, there's 5 areas for collaboration. Clean coal and CCUS is definitely in there, and at China's insistence. So if you're a coal company or power company or a technology vendor, you got something to talk about in this. We just had the second meeting of this group just a couple of months ago, and there we, among other things, had signing ceremonies that were actually company-to-company signing ceremonies that were blessed under this government umbrella. This is the way that people get promoted in China. If you're working as the president of the company and you have 10% growth, so does everybody else. What you really want is you want to have this guy standing behind you when you sign an MOU. That's the way that you work your way up in the system. So these counterfacing projects are commercial engagements. They're company-to-company partnerships and involve a number of universities, University of Kentucky, West Virginia, University of Wyoming, and they're really aimed at reducing emissions and continuing the use of coal. It's a wonderful thing, and I was glad to sort of be party to this. This is something I helped drive and put together, so I'm very, very proud of this. This is not the only time we do this. We're going to do this again next year. We're going to do this the year after that. So if you got something that you're interested in, let us know, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to work it. Something else I want to draw your attention to is the guy farthest to your right is John Podesta, advisor to the president. They absolutely get this and understand why it's important and try to figure out ways to help. Last thing I'm going to talk about is something that doesn't seem very big, but is. This is called the CERC, the USChina Clean Energy Research Center. It has 3 planks right now. One of those is clean coal and CCS. University of Kentucky, West Virginia University are charter, critical members to this, hugely, hugely important. This is recognized as the premier clean energy partnership between the United States and China, and in it, companies are highlighted. Companies are highlighted in terms of, and have access to senior government officials through the CERC that they wouldn't be able to otherwise, have access to Chinese companies that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. In part by my design personally, I've worked very, very hard to make this not just another $2 million R&D program for university professors, but really to be the seat at which this kind of trade and commerce growth of partnership can be built. I'm going to sort of just stop there, and I'm sure that I have less time than I'd like to, but I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Dr. Friedmann, at Southern States Energy Board, we've worked with a lot of countries over the years. We've worked with Brazil, we've worked with Thailand, we've been to Hong Kong and Vietnam, we've done a number of things. But one of the things that we have found always to be difficult is the doing of the deal. In other words, how does the deal get done in China? We've had foreign countries talk to us about all kinds of things, and then when it comes right up to making the deal and putting the money on the line, that's when things have gotten soft. So I'd like your comments on that.
Thank you very much. And I alluded to this very, very briefly in my presentation. But it's sort of what I think is sort of the secret sauce of making things work in China. The bottom line is that everybody is looking for, something that's self-interest, right? Everybody's looking for a way to get something out of it. And that's no different in China. The thing that's different in China is you don't actually know what that is. It's actually very hard to figure out what it is that motivates these guys and what they consider to be value. One of the most vexing things that US companies come to learn is that just because everybody makes boatloads of money is not enough. You'd think that's enough, but it's not. And so the way that I process that information personally is that the coin of the realm is not actually wealth. The coin of the realm is self-promotion. It's getting the next job. Everybody who I talk to in China has literally beat 10 million people out of a job. They're apex predators. They're very, very good at what they do. And that means that they understand how to interpret the government signals about what's important. They know what constitutes progress in their world, and they know how to get promoted. So let's say I'm talking to the chief technology officer of a major company. He's sitting there going, I don't know what my next job is. Maybe my next job is vice president of production. Maybe my next job is mayor of Xi'an. Maybe my next job is vice administrator for National Energy Administration, but I don't know what my next job is, but I sure as heck know who my competition is. There's 10 people out there in China who look just like me and I want to beat them. What do I need? If you can figure that out, you will close your deal. And sometimes what they need is they need something to just differentiate themselves. They can all get 10% growth, but can they actually have a signing ceremony with the governor? Can they actually create a joint venture? Can they deploy a groundbreaking environmental technology? Something that actually sort of moves the needle in some other dimension that you don't understand. And it's actually very, very much worth your time working with the US Embassy, working with people who are truly experts in China, and I'm happy to recommend people to you to sort of help you sort that out. Because otherwise, you get caught in this do loop. The first meeting in China is always great. Everybody's like, wow, you got that? We should work together. Second meeting's even better. It's toasts of Mautai, you sign an MOU, Peking duck all around. And then the third meeting is, things are going great. We want you to remain optimistic. You should remain optimistic. But things didn't go as quickly as we expected. There's still approvals we have to sort out. That third meeting, you can have another 20 of those. And you never know when the meeting finally changes to the, okay, we've got to sign a deal. And so learning in advance what it is that really is what these people seek makes it easier for you to provide that to them and close. And it's absolutely nonlinear, and it takes a while to understand it, but it's actually part of getting the job done. Other questions?
Dr. Friedmann, it sounds like the relationship thing is pretty big in dealing with China. Looking at the curve, the relationship between the U.S. and China, where are we on the curve as far as technology transfer, development opportunities? Would you say we're at the beginning, or we're
All right, so with that question, there's two different ways I would answer that. One of them is, on most things that we care about, we are in a growth trajectory, and we are higher than China is. Okay, on most things we care about, whether that's ability to innovate or quality of life or some other sort of thing, our curve is still sort of growing and up. Supercomputing access, material science publications, whatever's the thing you care about. China's vector is like this. Okay, they're not ahead of us, but they're catching up on pretty much everything. And that doesn't change unless we up our game. That doesn't change unless we bend our own curve and sort of accelerate a bunch of investment, a bunch of development, a bunch of good things. That's why I'm so interested in this sort of idea of the opportunity to build, because I think now is actually the time to get these things. A second answer to your question is, in terms of relationships, we are walking up the down escalator. In many arenas, and particularly on clean energy, the relationship's never been better, and everybody wants to see it come together. We are the carrot, the clean energy dialogue. Everything else is pretty much stick. Human rights, North Korea, cyber theft, all of these kinds of issues that are very real concerns, the South China Sea, you name it. But ultimately, I personally believe that stronger partnership between the United States and China is inevitable and beneficial. So we have to figure out how to navigate these things. So I actually want to see us working our way up the down escalator a little faster so we can continue to make progress on a variety of fronts that are critically important. Maybe one more question, and then I'm sure we're going to stand up.
We have time for one more question, Ken?
When I was in China, they were talking about how difficult contracts were, that they had a different view of contracts, that contracts could be brought back and re-looked at. When I was in China, they were talking about how contracts, they look at contracts in a totally different way than we do. A contract is kind of a fluid moving thing, where we think the door is closed. Would you expound on that?
Sure. So again, the question was about contracts and what does that mean? That's a really good question and a really good topic. Let me talk about it from two different perspectives. One is from the IP perspective. For a lot of clean energy stuff, the IP actually doesn't matter, but for other things, it actually does. The way that most US companies do this is they write a 60-page IP agreement and hand it to somebody in China, and the people in China just grab it and circular file it. And the reason why is because it's just their system doesn't work that way at all. It just doesn't. It's not that they don't respect IP issues, they do. It's just, what do we do with this? And they just throw it in the trash. One of the things we're trying to do, actually, we're working with the Patent and Trademark Office, and through the CERC, we're trying to create a series of pre-negotiated exhibits. 2-page things translated line by line together that everybody agrees on so that the terms of the IP are protected. Okay? And we hope to be able to deliver those within a year or two to make it easier for companies that are worried about this issue to sort of sort things out in advance. We've got a lot of buy-in on the Chinese side to do this, and we think that'll be useful. On the broader issue of contracts, the way that these things are resolved in the United States is through litigation. If you have breach of contract, you take it to court. Let me suggest that if you find yourself in a Chinese court, you've lost. That's really not where you want to go. So the way that you do this is is that the contract is sort of, almost sort of, what's the right way to say this? It's a suffix to your deal. It's not the main event. You shouldn't think of the contract as the main event. What you should think about is the terms. The terms are the main event, and then you should figure out how you lock those terms in. And if you think that the contract is the vehicle by which you lock those terms in, then you've missed something important. This is actually one of the real values that we provide through the CERC, and it's one of the values the Department of Energy can provide to companies. Because I'll tell you, nobody haggles over price like the Chinese. I mean, you know, it is absolutely in everybody's DNA to haggle over price about everything. They play hardball negotiations on every topic. So the business-to-business connection is not sufficient. You will get rolled. So you need to have a higher level of engagement between a state governor and a provincial governor, so that if the deal goes south, the governor can call the provincial governor on the phone and say, what happened to our deal? Because the provincial governor is not interested in some company making a little bit of extra money. He's interested in getting promoted, and he doesn't want to be the guy who's on record as having deals go south. Same thing with joint ventures. Joint ventures are a great way to get this done because you can get a Chinese company to invest in the venture. Then it's in their interest to make sure the terms are agreed to and the deal succeeds. And if you have problems with that, you should call our ambassador. The ambassador loves doing this. Gary Locke loved doing this. John Huntsman loves doing this. Max Baucus loves doing this. They love getting into the hurly-burly of this stuff. And again, nobody actually wants to see the project die. Nobody wants to see the commerce die. And so if there's a problem that emerges where the terms are run into some sort of breach or difficulty, you need another way of managing it. And so while contracts, I think, are going to remain important for people to sort of get their hands around, while the reform that's going on in China right now, being led by President Xi, is sort of percolating through the system, that will help. The one place where I would be very nervous about contracts in terms at this point is actually an oil patch. U.S. companies are highly reluctant to farm into Chinese acreage. And the reason why is because the big oil companies there are more powerful than most of the government figures. And so you can get rolled. And prices change, and nobody knows what the contracts work. But again, U.S. companies are starting to figure out ways now that they can navigate and manage that. Generally speaking, it helps to have friends, and I hope that you will consider us a resource in that context.
Dr. Friedmann, thank you for a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.